It's a shelter cat that my son got a couple of years ago. He was in an apartment living by himself and thought he would get a pet, although he had never owned a pet before, so didn't quite understand the responsibilities of pet ownership. So Mr. Waffles came to live with him, and his work required him to do a lot of travel, so he started parking Mr. Waffles with us. And I had no experience with a cat. This was the very first cat I had ever touched. And suddenly we have this little kitten living with us, because eventually Mr. Waffles stayed with us so much, he became our cat. And we learned to figure out how to change kitty litter and feed him and clip his nails and do all the things that one does for a cat. But one of the things that happened was, I am a designer. I also collect design. Furniture and furnishings like tea kettles and toilet brushes that have been designed by renowned architects and designers. And Mr. Waffles started to explore them. He would jump in the chairs, he would sniff them, scratch them. And you know, we are in Instagram era. So I started taking pictures and built Mr. Waffles an Instagram account, calling it Mr. Waffles Loves Design. And that's the origins that led to a book.
Oh, that is cool. I love that idea. And so the feedback was plentiful, I guess, for lack of a better word, that enabled you to realize this would make for a good book?
Well, I think the incongruity of having high design with a pet is a real novelty. And people were gravitating. You know, people who love cats love to see them in any kind of setting. And so they're seeing things that they've never seen before. And then there's people who love design, and you put a cat with design, you'll never find a cat or a dog juxtaposed with high design. Many of the things that I actually have in my collection are in museums. And certainly no museum would ever let a pet get near one of their objects.
And one of the fun things about this, with all your pieces, you have them itemized in the back also, but you managed just to have Mr. Waffles explore, and the color of Mr. Waffles, even though he's black, he really isn't a stark black, and he's got the best looking eyes.
Well, you know, black cats are actually extremely hard to photograph, and I heard that that's one of the reasons why they're not overly adoptable. It's because people love photographing their pets, and when they're black, they don't have any highlights. So it is tricky to get them where you can actually see their body parts. But with Mr. Waffles, his eyes change colors depending on what he's next to. So we had this great transformation. If he's, you know, on a yellow chair, his eyes are yellow. If he's on a green chair, his eyes are green. So we were able to bring out features about him that gave him more visual interest.
In the book, we not only see Mr. Waffles, but we see your designs. And the one thing that struck me was that it reminded me of a museum thing that Robin and I went to for the Memphis group with David Bowie or something like that. Do you know who we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. And Memphis, which was a design movement in the 1980s, it was a very short-lived design movement because it was so wild and crazy. It actually started in Italy, in Milan, Italy.
Is that right?
The architect that started it was listening to, I guess it was Elvis Presley wrote a song called the Memphis Blues.
Oh.
And that's how they named it Memphis. It has nothing to do with Memphis, Tennessee. And I have one of the chairs from the Memphis movement in the book. It's called the first chair.
Oh, that's from the group. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that's why it reminded me of it, because I was, when we went to this museum to see these pieces, it struck me as these are the kind of things probably a lot of people would buy, but for some reason we all go to the straight and narrow, you know?
Yeah, we don't, they're very avant-garde, and I love that.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, sometimes they're hard to integrate in your home. You know, it's kind of, and a lot of these are done almost as art objects. They're not necessarily intended to be sat on or to be used, but they're the focus of the room.
But you can't tell the cat don't sit on 'em. Cat's always going to sit on 'em.
No, Mr. Waffles has free reign. He can go anywhere.
And that's another thing that is brought out in the book is that people think that cats tear up things. They're scratching all the time.
They do,
and
Robin.
stuff.
They do.
Well, I know, but Mr. Waffles seems more intrigued with the designs than having to actually be there to scratch things up.
Well, you're only seeing a snapshot. You don't know the behind the scenes. But actually, when we got Mr. Waffles, he had already been declawed in his front paws. So although we would not have done that, that's how he came to us. And therefore, it does allow him. He has never damaged any of the objects, but he does rub against them, and he does rub his paws on, you know, the corrugated cardboard chair that we have. So he does, you know, make full use of these things.
Since you do greeting cards, tableware, gift wrap, things like, you know, hats, things like that, are you going to branch out Mr. Waffles into those genres?
You know, I'm not sure because I have my design career and then I have Mr. Waffles, and they're actually very separate. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure I'm going to put the two of those together. I think Mr. Waffles lends himself to not only being a book, but maybe a calendar or...
Oh, absolutely does, yeah.
We made up, you know, with the book, we made up pins of Mr. Waffles sitting on the chair. We made up some totes. But I think in general, my own design work, I work in cut paper, doesn't lend it's not a photography thing, and Mr. Waffles is all about photography.
Do you know what I'm wondering, and this is just a thought, that somebody who is not really interested, or they think they're not interested in design, will discover the world of design because they love cats. They might pick up the book because they're a cat lover, and all of a sudden realize, hey, that would be a cool chair to have, or that would be a cool bookshelf to have, right? Like the one of the cat sitting on the spiral bookshelf. That's cool. That's real, and it almost looks like a cat tail.
Yeah. You know, when I was working on the book, I gave an early copy of it to a 12-year-old because I wanted to see what her reaction was. She had never seen any of the objects in the book. And the very first reading of the book was she looked at all of the comments that Mr. Waffles had to say or his reflections about these objects. So she went through the entire book. We separate out Mr. Waffles' comments so that they're easy to pinpoint. And she went through the book seeing what Mr. Waffles had to say about these things. Then the second reading, she said, well, wait a minute. I want to learn more about what Mr. Waffles is talking about. Mm-hmm. So her second reading was she was then trying to read and discover what are these objects? What are they made of that makes them interesting? Or what is the construction technique? So there's many ways to view the book, but it's really a photography book first, seeing a cat in very unusual context.
And that's what's really wonderful about that, because each picture has something historical written about it with the comment from Mr. Waffles. Yeah.
Each page and each photograph has some information about what it is you're seeing and why it's important, why it's even in this book. But then Mr. Waffles simplifies it, normalizes it, and makes it accessible.
And who would ever think about a table being made with balloons? That was pretty cool.
There is actually, it's made with, you're right, it's a very simple wooden table, and the designer tied 500 balloons covering entirely this wooden table, so that all you see are the balloons. You don't see the original material. And what the balloons do, it's still a very functional table, but it adds this texture and color and whimsy to it. And of course, Mr. Waffles in that photograph is trying to pull those balloons off of there. Unsuccessfully, let me tell you.
Yeah.
That table is still in 100% pristine condition, no matter how much Mr. Waffles has attacked it.
So what does the rest of your living environment look like? Is it interspersed with your designs and the designs of others, or how would you describe that?
Well, I'm actually fortunate that where I live, we have a whole room that is kind of like my gallery, and that's where I set up a lot of these things. My own living environment is a little bit more normal, but we do have a few of them scattered throughout my house, like the plastic trash can called the Garbo can from Karam Rashid. We have them all over our house. It's our main trash can, and you can buy that at Bed Bath & Beyond. So it's a very, it was a $14 trash can, but it's also in museums all over the world because it was very unusual when it was designed in terms of its color, because it was pastel colors made out of plastic. And it's in the shape of a woman's body, a woman's torso. So it's a very elegant, simple design, and I use those. I live with those, but it's also in my collection.
Do you ever get design block? Because when you're working on a project, do you ever get frustrated where there isn't anything unique that's coming to you at that particular moment?
Absolutely, all the time.
Oh my gosh.
And then I go to a museum, or I go shopping to design stores, or I read design magazines, and I get re-inspired. It's about getting out into the world and seeing what's happening, and then you take in information from that, and you come back, and you're refreshed, reinvigorated.
Interesting that you say that, because I'm thinking that the book will do that same thing for other creative people, not just designers, but anybody. It just creates this desire to be creative. Can I play something? I tried to do something without being able to hear it, so I wanted to play it and see if you can comment on it. I have a sound since this is radio. Let's see if I got the right thing here.
I got a postcard from a French poet.
Okay, just forget the voice. I didn't know there was a voice on there. Can you hear the whistle in the background? Oh, gosh. That's the voice of Michael Graves. I'll just let you comment on that. That was the whistling bird from the tea kettle.
Oh, yes. And Michael Graves, who has passed away in these past couple of years, is probably the most successful architect who has designed product in the world. And his Whistling Bird tea kettle, which was created in 1985, really transformed an industry because he brought humor into product design and into a very serious and not inexpensive tea kettle. He put a little bird whistle on the end of the tea kettle. The handle is blue, the bird whistle is red, so it kind of has an American color palette to it. So it really appealed to the American market. The tea kettle has sold, the company has sold over $200 million worth of these tea kettles since 1985. And I know that statistic because the manufacturer, which is called Alessi, has told me that directly because I wanted that information for my book. And that tea kettle I've used that tea kettle for 20 years. It's on my stove. I have a second tea kettle that I've never used that's part of my collection. And then what happened was that tea kettle became so popular, Target hired Michael Graves to design for them. And he designed thousands of products for a program that they had called Design for All. And he became more of a household name. I knew of him as an architect because he started out in architecture. But he became most well known for the products he designed for Alessi and for Target.
Is that right? Wow.
I really like the chair that's made out of white plastic refrigerators. I
Oh,
think that's
yes.
pretty cool.
Yeah. Although that was dyed green, so that evolved. But
that
it was...
But that's pretty amazing, though, using the technology of today to make something like that. That looks kind of retro, but it fits in.
Yeah, so what the designer did was he took old plastic refrigerators and he melted down the plastic, and then he applied pigment to it so that he could colorize it. And then he forced that liquid plastic through a nozzle, kind of like with a toothpaste when you push it through a toothpaste tube. And he pushed it through the nozzle, and then he moved the nozzle back and forth, designing a chair. And when it dried and hardened, it's a functional chair. It's a structural chair.
It is fun to watch the cat looking at the different things. The one, I guess, that, and I'm like everybody else. In the book, you say that Zolo, people say, looks like Mr. Potato Head. That was the first thing I thought.
Yeah.
But I like the idea that I'm wrong, first of all, and the fact that it could be whatever you want it to be, male, female, or whatever, right?
Yeah, so this is a toy that was made originally out of wood, but now it's made out of plastic, and it comes in lots of parts, lots of pieces, and you assemble it the way you do Mr. Potato Head. But these parts don't look anything like a normal eye or an ear or a nose. These are zigzags and balls and crazy colors and all that, and you can make your own characters out of these different pieces.
Very cool. The photography, by the way, let's compliment that too. You did a really good job. I love the way that the negative space, the white, works so well, or the colors. It's not always white. Sometimes it's green or whatever. But I mean, the fact that it's just one pure color. You've done something with that. Even that part of the book itself is a design.
Well, thank you for noticing that. This is my third book that I've written about design. And one of the things that's most important to me is that a book about design should be well designed itself. I work very closely with a graphic designer who has designed all three of my books. And I also have a photographer. And the three of us work very closely together so that the photography, the graphics, and the content all send the same message. And therefore, the entire book is a design book.
And I do love the colors with each design, because I'm trying to picture every time I look at one of the designs a different color, and it just wouldn't work for me. So everything that you do, that you create, that you found, is the epitome of pleasure.
Well,
that's what I think.
Thank you.
So where's Mr. Waffles right now?
He's sleeping.
Yeah, I wonder. Robin and I do a children's podcast, and in the children's podcast, we have a pigeon named Billy. And it's an interesting thing that when the kids kind of communicate with us, it turns out that they call every pigeon Billy. And so I'm wondering how many children are going to call every black cat Mr. Waffles now.
Well, let's see. He may start a trend.
So what are you going to do with the individual pages that you have taken with each photograph? Because it really looks like it should go somewhere else.
Well, some of them, I've been thinking about that as well. We actually blew up some of them. I'm doing, in my book tour, I'm also doing a cat convention.
Oh.
So, yeah.
This is great. I love this.
So I have a booth, and I blew up one of the photographs. It's the backdrop for the booth. But some of them I'm thinking would make just great, posters themselves, because the photography really came out well with Mr. Waffles.
Let's see, I found the book on Amazon. You're getting some really good reviews. One of the reviewers writes, I was thrilled to receive my copy of Mr. Waffles Loves Design. It is fun, full of terrific information on design, and a treat for everyone anyone rather, who has a passion for well-designed products, along with a cat who shares their enthusiasm. I think it's information and inspiration. I think you are inspiring us just by exposing us to something fun and colorful and unique. I think those are the things that get the juices flowing for somebody creative.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Can you be my publicist?
Do you have a website?
We do. It's MrWafflesLovesDesign.com.
That's pretty good. Nobody had that one already, huh?
But we can see your creations on your website also.
Yes, my website is mydesignlife.com.
And do you still do the Instagram thing?
Yes, that's my Instagram for Mr. Waffles is Mr. Waffles Loves Design.
Oh, really? And does it ever happen? Oh, you don't take the cat outdoors, though, right? Or do you?
Actually, we do. Mr. Waffles spends a lot of time in our backyard. Because he doesn't have his front claws, he can't climb the tree and get away. So actually, he spends a lot of time outside.
Do you know, I have a quick funny story. When my son was little, he's 33 now, but when he was little, we had a Polaroid camera that had a remote control shutter release. And so he and I had this idea. We're going to set up the camera outside with a piece of cheese. And we're going to see if a squirrel comes up to it, and we're going to try to take a picture of a squirrel close up, right? So we put the camera out on the front lawn with the cheese in front of it, got into his bedroom, laid on the bed, looked out the window, and the first thing that came up to it was our own cat. We got a picture of our own cat, so yeah.
I think if you put an acorn out there, that would have gotten a squirrel.
Yeah, we had the wrong bait.
Yeah.
So how do you reward Mr. Waffles? Do you give him a reward?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, my gosh, yes. And especially when we're taking the photographs and he gets a little tired, we have a treat that he absolutely adores. And so we parcel them out very carefully, and he even knows the word snack.
Oh, how cool is that? That is pretty amazing.
And I noticed you set it a little low. You didn't want him to wake up, right?
Right, that's right. You got it.
Lisa, you...
Wait a minute. He's coming into the room right now. Uh-oh.
Hi,
no.
Mr. Waffles.
Lisa Roberts, you are as fun as your book is. Thank you so much for brightening our morning. That was so nice.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Robin.
All right,
You're welcome.
Mr. Waffles Loves Design. Go get the book. Lisa Roberts, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Hi, Matt Wilkerson here, your Verizon representative with news that will hum your car, make it smart and safe. How? With the new Hum device by Verizon. You can rest assured you're never alone. Flat tire? Lost? Accident? For $10 a month, Hum by Verizon has you covered.